Hi, I'm Bill Fletcher. Welcome to The Global African. Every week, we'll discuss the issues that impact not only the people living on the continent of Africa, north, south, east, and west, but those who, thanks to the colonialism, have created what we call the African diasporas, from blacks in the Americas to the culturally diverse peoples of Afro-Caribbean and Afro-European descent. We'll together do a deep dive into what it means to be a global African in the 21st century. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us in this journey as we together explore the African world. One of the most striking features of the U.S. working class is that black workers repeatedly, in virtually every opinion poll, have proven to be the most pro-union segment of the population. They're the most unionized, but also the most pro-union. The workers who, in any organizing effort, are almost always the first to join the union, to engage, to support organizing efforts, as well as to mobilize. Yet, despite this role that black workers have played, this sympathy for unions, as well as active role in building the union movement, the U.S. union movement doesn't seem to be quite clear as to what relationship it should have to black workers and what relationship black workers should have to the renaissance of labor in the United States. Joining us this afternoon is Bob Moore, longtime trade unionist, activist in the Black Freedom Movement in the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. area. Bob got his start in the trade union movement in 1969, became the president of a healthcare union in 1986, and held on to that position until 2005 when he stepped down from office. Thank you very much for joining us, Bob.
Thank you.
So, Bob, we have a situation right now where there's a poverty rate among black folks of about 27% nationally. We have an unemployment rate among black workers of 11% compared to 5% for whites. I'm not going to go through all the other demographics, but the question is this something that the trade union movement needs to be addressing?
I, of course, have thought for some time that, in fact, it did, but continues not to. But it's not, we have to always remember where this division between the white working class and the black working class began in slavery, and so these differences, we've always been poorer, we've always been lagging behind, and one of the unfortunate things in the American trade union movement is that they like to narrow the scope to specific job issues. I think, Gompers used to call it pure and simple, let's keep it simple, the contract, and so the greatest social and economic issues affecting both classes are usually swept under the table.
But when you were the president of your healthcare union, which eventually became part of the Service Employees International Union, you had a different vision for what trade unions should be doing.
Well, when I joined 1199 in 1969, it was as a result of an attempt to do national organizing and to piggyback on the Poor People's Campaign that Dr. King had begun about a year earlier. And so we were very hopeful, coming out of what was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and finding this new vehicle, which I thought would help us organize more workers and move the power questions ahead. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the vision that I at least had, and I thought 1190 had a reputation for having a diverse leadership, and so it looked like the place to do this work.
In the early 90s, as you remember, there was an increase in interest in organizing immigrant workers. As the demographics in the United States started to change, there were particularly a lot more Latino workers that were coming here. A number of unions started to pick up and started to address that in terms of organizing. Yet there has not been a comparable effort, at least that I can identify, of focusing on black workers, particularly in the South. What do you make of that?
I make that people haven't wanted to do that, and frankly, without stepping on toes, I don't think, in large part, the leadership of the American labor movement has been much interested in any of that. We've taken for granted that the South is going to be non-union. And we've taken, for instance, that in many instances, we don't necessarily want to spend the effort to organize workers. This was the case when I joined 1199. The reason, hospital workers were not organized, particularly low-wage service workers, and nobody had wanted to do that. Mm-hmm. Nobody put in the resources. They were not covered under the National Labor Relations Act, and so it required, the union engaged in a number of activities and demonstrations outside of the law and tried to create a situation where they could gain recognition and participation. And because of its link to the civil rights movement, did for a couple of years experience significant growth.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just ask you. Let me take a piece of what you were talking about. It seems that on the one hand, some of these efforts internal to the union movement by black workers have resulted in almost a complacency that they become accepted through some of these caucuses within the established organization, and then very little happens after that. The other thing is, to be very pointed, that black workers seem to scare white folks. I mean, would you say that's true?
Well, I think that's generally true in America, but what I would say is it's not so much that, though, as a problem, as what the definition of the union becomes to people. Right? Because, you get a job on the union staff, and the union's been good in that sense. The union's been good in moving contracts of people ahead, so the union is, in large degree insular. It's not, looking out at the larger community, and as a general rule, black workers and other workers, pretty much get sucked in. The union becomes a sideline, it's not a movement, it's a sideline. Church is more important, mm-hmm. Right? Right. Community clubs are more important during these, and so the union has this space built around, I think, Gomper's notion of pure and simple. Mm-hmm. Right. And black workers are, like everybody, they're subject to that notion, because I know many black workers think the union has been good, and they've often been very successful, and people become content. Race always remains an issue and a factor, but inside the union, people tend not to want to discuss the issue of race.
Indeed. I want to thank you for joining us. This has just been a wonderful discussion, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
I am at your beck and, brother.
Thank you very much.
Struggle does continue.
It does indeed. It does indeed. The Western Sahara is often and perhaps dismally known as the last African colony. The Western Sahara was first colonized by Spain during the 1400s and later reclaimed by Spain during the Berlin Conference in 1884. However, during the period of colonization, the Sahrawi people resisted Spanish occupation. By 1975, after years of resistance from the Sahrawi National Liberation Movement known as Polisario, the Western Sahara was decolonized, and the Western Saharan people were, at that point, supposed to govern themselves. However, in November of '75, at a meeting called the Madrid Accord, Spain gave Morocco and Mauritania rights to the Western Sahara, which illegally recolonized the Western Sahara, despite protests from the United Nations and the Organization of African Unity. The International Court of Justice determined the Moroccan and Mauritanian claims of sovereignty over the Western Sahara were illegitimate, with no legal stake in the territory. Despite a global consensus that the Western Sahara had a right to its own sovereignty, King Hassan II of Morocco ordered the Moroccan invasion of the Western Sahara in a campaign that came to be known as the Green March in November of 1975, when 200,000 to 300,000 Moroccan citizens were sent to claim the Western Sahara as a territory of Morocco. Morocco increased its aggression with airstrikes against the Sahrawi citizen settlements, with both napalm and cluster bombs, causing a mass exodus of at least 165,000 Sahrawi citizens over the eastern border, where they settled in tented communities close to the Algerian town of Tindouf. For almost 40 years, nearly half of the indigenous population of the Western Sahara have lived in refugee camps in Algeria. In the time during the conflict, Morocco has sold licenses to phosphate-rich mineral deposits in the Western Sahara to private multinational companies, though the global consensus is that they have no right to the land of the Western Sahara. These are some of the issues that have contributed to this nearly 40-year conflict over the right of a people to govern themselves and control their own land. Today, on The Global African, we will examine the plight of the people of the Western Sahara, the people of the last African colony. Today, it's our honor to engage in a discussion with Dr. Jacob Monday, a professor from Colgate University in New York State. Dr. Monday is a specialist in armed conflict and humanitarian interventions in Northern Africa. He also is the co-author of the book Western Sahara, War, Nationalism, and Conflict Irresolution. Dr. Monday, thank you for joining us on The Global African.
It's an honor to be with you.
So, Dr. Monday, let me just start with what may seem like a very simple question, but one that plagues many people. Why is it that the conflict in the Western Sahara has lasted so long? I mean, we're talking decades.
Yeah, I mean, the conflict is approaching its fourth decade very shortly. There are a lot of reasons for its perpetuation. One is just two mutually exclusive visions regarding Western Sahara. You have Morocco believing that Western Sahara is part of its sovereign territory, and then you have a nationalist movement that wants to create an independent republic in the territory. But at the international level, you have an international community that is largely indifferent to the conflict, not interested in managing it or giving it serious attention. And so year by year, the conflict drags on and the Security Council pays attention to it, maybe a couple of days at the end of April every year when you have to renew the UN mission. But otherwise, it's largely a forgotten conflict that's very low on the agenda, if on the agenda at all.
The conflict seems to bear an interesting resemblance to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I mean, in the Western Sahara, you have these massive settlements of Moroccans, the ignoring of any issue of self-determination for the Sahrawi people. Do you think that that's a fair comparison?
Well, certainly Morocco's presence in the territory can be described and has been described by international legal scholars as an occupation, and thus warranting the application of the Geneva Conventions to the situations. One of the effects of that, of course, is that Morocco's settlers in the territory, who outnumber the indigenous population by at least 2 to 1, are there illegally, and Morocco has violated international humanitarian law by bringing so many of its citizens into the territory. Other applications of the Geneva Conventions in terms of maltreatment of the population, daily abuses, torture, imprisonment, arbitrary detention, the list goes on and on. But yes, I mean, in terms of international humanitarian law, the situations are very similar. They're also very similar in terms of the question of aggression, because Morocco acquired the territory through the use of force against Spain, which was actually the colonial colonizer in 1975. Mm-hmm. And it was through the threat and the use of force that Morocco gained the territory. So in that way, it's also very similar to the Palestinian occupied territories, which Israel gained by force as well.
Dr. Monday, thank you so much for your time. You honor us by being on our program, and I'm hoping that people will go out, pick up your book, study the situation in the Western Sahara, since it gets such little attention in the media in North America. Thank you very much for joining us on The Global African.
Thanks for having me.
In 1975, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 379, by which it requested the immediate withdrawal of the Green March participants from the territory. Polisario declared the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic on February 27, 1976, and announced its first government, despite the aggression and occupation by Morocco. Today we welcome to the Global African Mr. Mohamed Yeslam Besat, the ambassador of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic and the Polisario Front, which has led the struggle for independence of the Western Sahara. Thank you very much for joining the program, Ambassador.
It's my honor. Thank you very much for having me here.
Let me ask you very directly, what do you see as the main obstacles, the chief obstacles to the resolution to a conflict that's been going on decades?
The main and soul and the core obstacle for the resolution of this conflict is the lack of political will inside the Moroccan government. Today, Mr. Christopher Ross is waiting for more than a year to have an appointment with the king. It has been 3 years without conducting a new round of negotiations because Moroccans doesn't allow him to do so. He has not been visited the territory almost in 3 months because, again, Morocco is not allowing him to go to visit. Actually, all the United Nations, African Union, European Union efforts to solve this problem have been always confronted with the stubbornness and the obstructionist attitude of Morocco, who has a position that it's unfounded and undefendable. They claim a sovereignty that no one recognizes in the world. They claim a sovereignty that the International Court of Justice have ruled against it. Claim a sovereignty of a territory that is they don't want to allow its population to have a free expression about the determination of these people. So I will say this Moroccan lack of political will to cooperate with the United Nations to resolve the problem is the main issue. Nevertheless, and as accessory to that, the position of some Western powers who tend to support Morocco, right or wrong, to always go with Morocco, always side with Morocco, regardless of the position of Morocco. What is it?
Morocco has made allegations that Polisario is a terrorist organization, but in the last couple of years, they have upped the stakes. And there are these allegations that Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb has been, at a minimum, recruiting in Sahrawi refugee camps in Algeria. Is there any truth to any of this?
Moroccan media love to do this, and funny enough, they don't substantiate their claims with any evidence. They don't bring in the name of one Sahrawi who is there, one Sahrawi commander who is there, a list of Sahrawis who have been recruited, suicide bombers who have been there. It's the opposite. We find many Moroccans in Daesh, in ILIS, in Iraq. We find them in Al Qaeda. We find them in AQMI. We find them even in the 9/11 bombing. You know, Moroccans, terrorists have been in every terrorist organization, but no one is there to say that government of Morocco is supporting to that. Morocco is trying to make the amalgam between some Sahrawis who might be. We are still waiting those to see,
right,
and the link between Polisario. But the problem that Morocco is facing, that for many years he tried to label Polisario as a Marxist-Leninist organization, is when the Cold War was there.
Right.
Now the Cold War is not there. He's trying to label Polisario as Salafist, and maybe tomorrow, if there is a new phenomena in the world, Morocco, you know. Like there is no fixed nature for Polisario. No, it's Morocco fix its nature and its identity as it suits him in the international media, and it's doing more harm to Moroccan propaganda than to the reputation of Polisario, which now 40 years old organization, well known in North Africa and in the world.
One thing that I've been wondering about the work of Polisario is that with the settlements by the Moroccans and the Moroccan settlers now outnumbering the native Sahrawis. What is Polisario doing within the occupied territories? How is it organizing? And what kind of relationship does it have with the settlers, if any?
The settlers are two kinds, very different from each other. Those are soldiers who are linked totally to the occupation, to the administration, families of the soldiers, of the colonels, of the officers, of the administration, part and parcel of the occupation apparatus. And there are normal citizens, your normal Moroccan citizens coming from any Moroccan town, coming there to open his bakery or to work or to do some sort of business. They behave exactly like their community in Spain or their community in Portugal or their they are there to collect some money and go back to their country. And we have no problem with the second part of that. We are aware that, as Bismarck said, the only part of geography you can change is history. Moroccans are our neighbors, like the Algerians, like the Mauritanians. Our present is shared with them, and we are very sure also our future will be shared with them, but in mutual respect for each other and in the total respect of the Sahrawi rights and the Sahrawi dignity and the Sahrawi culture and the Sahrawi rule of law. And we can cooperate with them in the future. We need their labor. They need us as a labor market, and because of this mutual beneficiary relation, we can build on it for the future.
The African Union has been on record in supporting the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic.
African Union since day one have been very consistent with the founding fathers' principle established in the Charter of OAU than in the Constitutive Act of the African Union. The respect of self-determination, the scrupulous respect of inherited colonial frontiers at independence, and the right of the Sahrawi people for self-determination. The last summit in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, again, the African Union have issued a new resolution confirming its support to the Sahrawi Republic and taking a very important decision to nominate President Joaquim Chissano as Special Envoy of African Union in Western Sahara. Joaquim Chissano is a widely respected
former president
of Mozambique, the one who negotiated the settlement and the peace for Mozambique between Frelimo and Renamo, the one who contributed very strongly in the resolution of the South African problem and the apartheid issue. He is a very skillful, who was Minister for Foreign Affairs for many years in Mozambique. We are very confident that he have the skills, the knowledge, and the capacity to contribute very positively in the United Nations efforts, because the United Nations efforts have started as a joint venture between United Nations and the African Union.
Given that overall situation, do you see a resolution to the conflict happening anytime soon?
Yes, I'm very confident that the future is, in the near future, we will find the solution with our neighbors, the Moroccans. Morocco cannot continue to take Western Sahara hostage, to take the Moroccans hostage for the issue of Western Sahara, and to take the whole Maghreb as a hostage for this issue. Morocco cannot take the entire international community as a hostage for a position that is not consistent, that is illegal, that is not recognized and not shared by anyone in the world. I think international community have been very permissive and very accommodating to Moroccan intransigences and to Moroccan nonsenses. I think now the stakes are very high. The region is very complex. There is the Mali issue, there is the Sahel issue, there is the Middle East issue, there is the immigration crisis from North Africa to Southern Europe. There is the global crisis of economic, where the Maghreb region is a very promising place in the international economy. I think we cannot leave all these very high priorities for everyone just and keep quiet because His Majesty is pertaining and adopting an undefendable position in Western Sahara. I think time has come to show, and the interests are very high for everyone to push for a speedy solution for the Western Sahara issue.
Mr. Ambassador, we could have this discussion for hours, and we're unfortunately out of time. But I really want to thank you for joining us for this edition of the Global African.
No, I want to thank you. Thanks are due to you, Mr. Birflisher, and to Telesur. It was my honor to be here with you.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank you, our viewers and listeners, for joining us for this edition of The Global African. I'm Bill Fletcher, your host. Thank you.